I'm a Welsh noble, I mobilise Wales against the English. Owain Glyndŵr fought King Henry IV because Wales abhorred English rule. It's not unusual, but my uprising, it went a bit wrong, and this song tells the surprising tale.
Croeso, welcome to Tales for Wales. This is part 2 of the 5-part Owain Glyndŵr saga. And as we mentioned last week, we're not going to have any badinage or bants up front. We're going to go straight into it because it's bloody long.
This is a banter-free zone, right, for the next couple of fucking hours.
A bit close to banter, so you're lucky there. You
just lay away with that. One and done, that's it.
But as a quick recap, the rebellion was now growing beyond just a rebellion. It was becoming a nationwide movement. English royal expeditions weren't working, and they couldn't bring Owain out, and none of the Welsh would betray Glyndŵr, so he continued his guerrilla warfare and sieges across English castles in Wales, as well as some attacks now across the border. He's getting ballsy. The English had issued more punitive policies against the Welsh and raised taxes and excluded the Welsh from positions of power, so it was even more dangerous to be a Welsh person now. The Welsh people who had become economic migrants into England had started downing tools and returned to Wales. The Welsh intelligentsia, they left their studies at Oxford and decided to come back to Wales. There was like a riot in Oxford from Welsh, smart, clever clogs. Students at Oxford.
You can't have our beautiful Welsh brains anymore. We're taking them home, baby.
And there's this fantastic story that is sort of classed as a myth, but I like to kind of imagine there's truth in it. And it's thought to have happened either at the very start of the war or towards the end. This guy, Rhys Coch Eryri, which means Red Rhys of Snowdon, most likely because of his hair. And like I mentioned last week, red hair is quite a thing of North Wales at the time. He was a poet and also a big fan of Glyndŵr, and he has this amazing story of how Owain went to go visit Rhys, and Rhys said, "Stay as long as you want, mate. I know it's been hard. Rest your cockles. We'll have a little chill." And he sent one of his men as a lookout in the Colwyn Valley, which is the path the English king's men would have to come when they were looking for Glyndŵr. Quick respite for a drink. Quick pouring a drink here.
Any bard worth his salt needs a little bit of libation, my friend.
Oh, libation! What a beautiful word. Yes. So he said, like I said, mentioned Rhys Coch already sent one of his men as a lookout at the Colwyn Valley, the path the soldiers would take. And after resting and drinking and catching up in the Wyddfa mountains, or Wyddfa, Rhys Coch, his horseman, comes galloping into Rhys's man's house and shouts as a large English force is coming up the valley, far bigger than anything they could defend against. So Rhys and Owain wore old cloaks and hats and disguised themselves as servants, and they tried to surreptitiously sneak past up the mountain near this place, this like infamous part of the mountain called Simnai Fall, or on a mountain called Moel Hebog. Moel Hebog, which means it's Welsh for Bare Hill of the Hawk. And it's 783 metres high, so 2,569 feet. It's a mountain in Eryri National Park, North Wales, overlooking Bedd Gelert, for anyone who's done the walking around there.
Very nice.
And it's in that area is now renowned for being really steep with challenging ascents. It's got amazing 360-degree views of Wyddfa and Eryri, which makes sense why it's why they'd have Welsh people there keeping an eye out.
You'll need to drive around that area, North Wales, to just see how the mountainous it is, and these things go from fucking 0 to 100 straight up, like you said. So steep.
Yeah, so you're right. It's known for being incredibly steep and how it equals up and down. So Glyndŵr and Rhys were calmly making their way up with their horses when they were spotted by the English and they had a scarper. So the steep wooded slope of the mountain was way too difficult to try and ride off. So they abandoned the horses and carried up on foot. The English were too quick in their pursuit, and Rhys apparently advised them to split up so he could take at least some of the English away from Glyndŵr and potentially save his life. When they reached this rocky outcrop, they split, and that caused the English then, who were keeping up with them, to split as well. So the plan was working. However, Rhys's hat flew off, and the English saw his red locks and realised that he wasn't Glyndŵr, and he was this redhead ranger. So they stopped chasing after him, and then the whole force begins chasing Glyndŵr. And we have to remember throughout all of this, depending on when the chase happened, he was either in his mid to late 40s, or he was in his early 50s. Like I said at the start, this either happened towards the end. Yeah. That's what I wrote next. He wasn't a spring chicken. And if this happened towards the end, he would have been a lot older. They often called him Owain Llwyd, meaning grey Owain, due to his colour of his hair.
I'd never heard that nickname before.
No, cool. Loads of bards call him in. There's a poem I'll read later that they mention him as well. And I read, if you managed to survive up until you were 23 in this era, a good innings for you would be to die at 59. So that means you have well past your sell by date. So if you manage to survive childhood and birth, which most people died at, it's a really high percentage of children died. If you can make it to your 20s, you then, a life expectancy of a man in Wales at the time would be for a well-off person to nearly make 60. But, that's like making it to 100 nowadays.
Yeah.
So he was already getting close to the age where he would naturally die, and now he's having to run across the mountain.
And I got to leg it, mate.
And the reason they say it either happened at the start or at the end was because at the start and at the end, he had to rely on sneaking around a lot more. So in this time here where he was at this person's house, at Rhys's house, if it was in the middle, he would have had his army with him, and he'd be, in his height of his reign, he would have to skulk around, but they assume he's either at the very start or towards the very end. Anyway, Glyndŵr is now scrabbling across this notoriously difficult mountain, and he's being chased by soldiers half his age. So Glyndŵr switched direction and he decided to run down the hill to a place called the Pass of Aberglaslyn, which at the time the sea came up to this western end of the pass, which no longer exists. It's kind of been taken away now, so the sea doesn't reach there anymore. But he was hoping he could reach the sea part of it. But the English preempted this, and they sent their best runners to cut him off. So he was running down the hill, and he got cut off there. So Glyndŵr changes course again and now heads back towards Moel Hebog. He then hoped to cross left across the steep ridge and escape into Cwm Pennant, but soldiers were closing in on him there as well. So he couldn't go down.
It's getting dicey.
And he couldn't go left. So he's now going right, which now saw more soldiers coming down the hill because they stopped chasing Rhys. They were now coming after him from this direction, and he was completely surrounded. He was trapped. The only place he could physically go was to climb up, literally climb the mountain. So he started climbing up, and he closed this dark cleft of ridges, which is around 250 feet above him. And this part of the mountain is described as being like a climbing a narrow chimney attached to the side of a mountain. So he starts climbing this tiny chimney chute, and he get there as far quicker than the soldiers in their armour could. So he managed to make a bit of time on them. And by the time he reached the top of the chimney ridge, Glyndŵr was gone. The rest of the army couldn't quite find him. And he sneaked off into a hidden cave on an adjacent mountain called Moel yr Ogof, which, and they believe the name Moel yr Ogof, which means hill of the cave, is named after the cave that Glyndŵr hid on or within that mountain. So there's a place called Moel yr Ogof. It's quite a tongue twister. And Moel, meaning hill, Ogof, cave. And there's actually a cave within that mountain that's now called Ogof Glyndŵr, or Glyndŵr's Cave, which Glyndŵr took refuge at and was brought food by Rhys secretly. So apparently this could have been for nearly 6 months whilst he was being hiding from the English, that he was hiding in this cave, which places the story towards the end of the rebellion. And again, 6 months is kind of arbitrary, but he ended up hiding in this cave whilst the English were trying to look for him all over, and they couldn't find him because he climbed such an intense...
Scaled it.
So. And there's a modern rock climbing guidebook that routes loads of ways up Eryri, and they also note who was the first person to ever climb that route. And there's one route that reads Glyndŵr's Gully, 250 feet, first ascent, Owain Glyndŵr, circa 1400. Nice. So you kind of know him as being the first person to do it.
About the founding guy of the route. I love it.
This is either at the start or the end. And that's one story about Glyndŵr running away up a mountain. But let's now discuss something more heroic with him chasing the English themselves up a mountain. And we're going to look at the Battle of Hyddgen, which is one of the earliest episodes we ever did. Do you remember that? It's very...
Battle of Mynydd Hyddgen, I remember. I always get it confused with Kriegmawr.
Yeah, both on a mountain or on a hill. Kriegmawr a couple of centuries beforehand. But Hyddgen, we'll revisit it together now. The battle took place in June 1401, roughly a year after Glyndŵr launched his revolt against the English rule in Wales. Glyndŵr had declared himself Prince of Wales a year before, and he's steering which would like cause a huge uprising. Like, as you mentioned in the last episode, the English crown were having fucking none of it. By 1401, so a year after this, Glyndŵr declared himself Prince of Wales, English authorities were mobilising forces from the martial lordships and border counties to quell the rebellion in central and mid Wales, particularly in the region of Ceredigion. Now, as we're just talking about a mountain, and as most people will know, Wales is bloody full of them. And Mynydd Hyddgen, and me and you like this, we like talking about etymology, don't we? It's quite interesting to understand the words. So Mynydd Hyddgen, broken down, it means Mountain of the Stag or Stag Mountain, and it's located in the Ceredigion uplands, famously where Glyndŵr has his big battle, but specifically Mynydd Hyddgen gets its name because Mynydd meaning mountain and Hydd means like stag or deer, and then the gen likely refers to a local river. So it's a bit of an amalgamation of words, but it's kind of gives you this image of it's very much a natural place. It's a mountain, Mynydd. It's got like deer and stag on it, the Hydd, and then the Gee and the river, the local river running through it. It's rugged and it's part of the Cambrian uplands. And around there, it's quite notorious for being quite steep, sloped, boggy, and narrow passes, often favouring like small mobile forces in this landscape, setting up the scene for Glyndŵr from a good old scrap. Glyndŵr's forces used the terrain tactically, forcing the English into disadvantaged positions and preventing them from forming strong, cohesive lines, because it's hard to form a line when your mountains go up and down and part of the mountain is made of like bog. And the Welsh were mostly archers on hill ponies, so they were well suited for this mountainous terrain, whereas the English troops consisted of infantry and heavy cavalry, who were far better for smashing densely packed formations on more even ground. They couldn't do much against Glyndŵr because he wouldn't fight on a flat
They were
plain.
like the heavy horse. We've talked about this loads, but it's like they were the secret weapon on a pitch battle, like a flat field. You're fucked if the heavy horse come at you.
Yeah, Battle of Hastings, when the shield wall finished, the Norman heavy horse like broke ranks and destroyed them. They couldn't do that in Wales because we never really fight on a flat land; it's always on mountains. And also loads of the Welsh were mostly archers, and like I mentioned, on hill ponies, were much better suited for this mountainous terrain. Whereas the English, they had this heavy cavalry. They couldn't get around like how you could move around. Like the horses were just like sort of falling over themselves and crumbling under their own weight. So it's possible that Glyndŵr, he did this like Mongolian feigned retreat into the mountains. So he'd start attacking them, and then he'd look like, oh fuck, there's hundreds of you, or actually more than that, thousands of you. I'm going to run back a little bit. So then the English would chase them, and it's like I read a book that described it as very Mongolian because apparently they used to do that under
like draw
Genghis
the forces
Khan. He used to draw
into like
loads of forces,
shitter terrain, or whatever.
Yeah, and he'd bring them back. So it was this feigned retreat that apparently he did, and then that caused the English troops to be heavily fatigued because they were then chasing after it across this up and down terrain. In terms of numbers, Glyndŵr was massively outnumbered. The Cymraeg had several hundred, no more than 500 people to fight on their side. And like I said, mostly archers, javelers, or on hill ponies, all incredibly lightly armoured. The English, who had Flemish reinforcements, who we talked about in a recent episode around the Lanska line and how the Flemish had been brought into Pembrokeshire to kind of colonise the area, they had a much larger force in the low thousands, around 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000, which is, Wales had 500 max and they had 2,000 max, is 1 to 4. There's a suggestion that the English had tried to ambush Glyndŵr and his men, who were sat in the Cambrian Mountains. That's where they used to kind of hide out a lot, which is the Cambrian Mountains as well. It's located in the heart of mid Wales, spanning areas like Ceredigion, Powys and Carmarthen, and it's situated between Eryri or Snowdonia in the north and Banebrycheiniog to the south. This upland-like range is often referred to as the Green Desert of Wales due to its remote, sparse landscape. And Glyndŵr would often chill there for protection because you can just see from every direction. So he's like, he felt safe there. But it's also really unlikely that they try to ambush him because 2,000 men make a lot of like racket. Their campfires were really visible. And it's like from that landscape you can see them kind of coming across, and they were heavily armored, so they're not really built for an ambush. But they would have been a
slow moving thing as well. It's not like they could come in and blitz you.
Exactly. And anyway, battle broke out, and it's thought that given the presence of multiple grave sites, because loads of people had been killed in this, it seems likely that the engagement happened in 2 or 3 parts, with these hit-and-run strikes being used by the Welsh, archers peppering the English, and then running away and doing this feigned retreat, so the English chase them up a hill, get bogged down, get peppered again by arrows and javelins and stuff, and the marshy terrain bogging down the horses, so the cavalry end up getting slaughtered. And it kind of travels along for a couple of miles of just a like in Total War when you chase around an army and all their dead bodies up in there. Yeah. The English end up having to rout. They run away themselves, and they left all their caravan of weapons and armor behind for Glyndŵr and his men to just yoink.
Lovely little haul.
And like I mentioned, it's only like a year in, and it's a massive, decisive Welsh victory against a much better armoured and against much bigger numbers. And it kind of instills this, like, oh shit, we can do this, even though we don't have any of the forces.
Dare we dream to win?
Right. And the English forces suffered significant losses compared to the Welsh casualties, which were minimal. Glyndŵr's reputation soared, proving he could lead not just a revolt, but a real capable army. And he was very much involved in this battle. The victory encouraged wider support, with more local Welsh levies joining the uprising. And then by autumn of 1401, Hotspur, that guy I mentioned in the last episode, who was this great fighter who was getting sick of the English. Yeah, he's getting pissed off at all this money he'd been spent. And he kind of realised that, like, not being paid by this broke-ass king would come back to bite him. And although most of Wales were burnt down, the Welsh themselves, like, they actually, despite everything being on fire around them, they felt really, like, united from here, and they were like, there was no other prominent leaders, and everyone could just get behind Owain. So there was like this leader in England who was angering and causing division amongst his followers. Like Henry was going, what the fuck, I'm doing all this stuff, I'm not getting paid, I can't pay my soldiers, I can't pay my nobles, and
going into debt, just to keep the war machine going
against Henry. Whereas in Wales, they were like, fuck, this guy is winning, he's beating one of the biggest like countries and empires in the world, and he's winning. And like the contrast between people who have fallen out of love with Henry IV compared to everyone in Wales starting to go, fuck, we should do this.
Adoring like Owain. Yeah.
So there's this leader in England who was angering and causing division amongst his followers, compared to Glyndŵr, who was creating unseen unity. The king decided to reinforce all garrisons, and for the first time in ages, there were men-at-arms and archers placed at castles that had laid dormant in Wales for ages. This was becoming even more costly for the English, because they now had to pay to have like men at these castles.
Yeah, more wages.
So loads of the nobles tried to get the king to find a way to negotiate terms. And apparently Glyndŵr was very much up for this, because he kind of knew this isn't going to end. Like, I can't beat England.
I mean, surely as a guerrilla outfit, a rebellion, what you're striving for is you're not going to dominate England, are you? Do you know what I mean? It's not going to happen. Well, you don't think it's going to happen, surely. But like, if you can get some sort of favourable terms and make it a bit of a better place for you and your people, great.
And because Hotspur had felt disillusioned, he ended up reaching out to Glyndŵr, and Glyndŵr was like, right, if you mediate on my behalf, I think I can come to terms with this. So Glyndŵr himself wouldn't go and speak to the king, but
we've learned that lesson from Llewellyn, my friend. Yeah.
But King Henry IV couldn't stomach it. He was like, no chance. So it was back to war. And by November, towards the end of the second year of the rebellion, so 1401, Glyndŵr adopted this Arthurian comparison, and he raised the flag of King Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, so head of the dragon. Pendraig is often known as, which is this great golden dragon on a white shield. And this like symbolizes that he is now Pendragon, chief prince and king of all Britons. He really laid in.
It's a really cool emblem, actually. It's like
it's good, isn't it? Yeah,
because like, don't get me wrong, we've got some cool emblems in Wales. Like the flag itself is great, Draigor. You get some cool ones like Glyndŵr's coat of arms is cool as well.
I'll go into that in a bit as well.
But the gold dragon is so, I think, it's so unique among our kind of.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah. And also, like, gold is a hard color to come by, so it looks pretty fucking sick in this time. But yeah, so sorry, I've been a bit rambling here. So Glyndŵr, he realises he's kind of got a weird opportunity that, yes, he is a guerrilla fighter, but England isn't as strong as it once was, because it's a new king in charge, and he is fighting rebellions on 4 fronts. He's got the Irish he's fighting, the Scots he's fighting, the Welsh he's fighting, and the French. That's 4 nations up against him, even though they're the aggressor in all 4 nations, maybe not with France, but they are still, like, it's 4 people trying to fight at once. And now there's stitches coming undone because nobles in the north are getting pissed off that they're not making any money from this whatsoever. So this is the era where we start seeing not only Glyndŵr as like a warrior prince, but as a diplomat. So he decides to send letters to most important leaders in all those countries. So he sent letters in French and in Latin. And like I mentioned before, he was like a learned man. He was like clever. So he sent letters in French and Latin to Robert III, who was King of Scotland. He sent letters to different Irish lords, and he sent a letter to the Charles VI from France. The letters he sent to Ireland and Scotland, they're really humble letters, which I can read. I'll read like a slightly redacted version of them now. But the first one was from Glyndŵr to the King of Scotland. And he starts it, most redoubted lord, know that Brutus, your noble ancestor and mine, was the first king crowned who dealt in this realm of England, for which old times is called Great Britain. From which Brutus begat 3 sons, to wit Albanact, Locrine, and Camber, from which the same Albanact you were descended in direct line. And the issue of the same Camber reigned royally down to Cadwallader, who was the last crowned king of my people, and from whom I, your simple cousin, am descended in direct line. So he's like really trying to reach out to the Scots in history and be like, hey, we are the Britons, let's join together.
The Celtic cousins, come on, boys. Yeah.
And then to the Irish chieftains, he goes, greetings and fullness of love, most dread lord and right true cousin. Be it known unto you that a great discord or war has arisen between us and our and your deadly foes, the Saxons. Our well-beloved cousins in Ireland must reach out forth hereto and help in hand with heart and soul. We pray that your horsemen and footmen delay not do this by the love we bear you and as we put our trust in you. He's like really like playing on like, come on, please help us.
Yeah,
but
I love as well that they've got, by this point they were very much English, they'd be called England, what I mean? They'd be called themselves English. But the fact he's like going
Still
back, harkening back to that, come on, there's Saxons, we're all Celts, like that division type thing, yeah.
And the reason we have these letters, because he sent these letters via spies, but both the spies got caught and beheaded, and then the letters were confiscated and then kept in English annals, so now we have these.
Imagine.
I know. And I read this amazing chronicle in this 15th century Scottish chronicle called the Scotchcorian or Scotchacronian, and it commented on Glyndŵr's rising, and he wrote, the Britons, in brackets Welsh, shall flourish. So the Britons shall flourish in alliance with the Alban people, and people who don't know, Alban or Alba is what we call the Scots. So it says this in this 15th century chronicle, the Britons shall flourish in alliance with the Alban people. The whole island will bear its ancient name. As the eagle proclaims, speaking from an ancient tower, the Britons and the Scots will rule their fatherland. They will rule in harmony and quiet prosperity. And now, isn't that a beautiful Britain? Which I like that.
A beautiful Britain, isn't it? Beautiful Britain. But that is, again, that shows if maybe that letter had reached...
I know.
The King of Scotland, you
could have been,
yeah, exactly.
But this is so. Even though that letter didn't reach the King of Scotland, this was a Scottish chronicler writing that about Glyndŵr's rebellion. So it's like, oh
that's
god,
what
they were supporting
the
it.
Sentiment was there, wasn't it?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And also, as I mentioned, Hotspur, he'd been negotiating for Glyndŵr, and during one court session, Glyndŵr had been accused of genocide against the Flemish. So that they just said, oh, not only is he a rebellion, he's actually a genocidal maniac in southwest Wales. Percy had to defend that, and lots of the English and the Flemish who were in the court found that to be traitorous. So, like I mentioned, Glyndŵr had sent Hotspur to negotiate, and when they said, he's a genocidal maniac, he's like, no, he's not. And because he kind of stood up for him, they were all like, oh, hang on. How much can we trust you anymore if you're going to be like defending?
Just because he's saying, look, I'm all for putting him to the sword, but let's not make up lies about him. He's an honourable man.
Honourable. And also, so here I talk about the actual size difference between what Glyndŵr was dealing with and what the English had. So in general, there's a consensus that there's 150,000 to 250,000 inhabitants in Wales, and that includes English and Flemish and Welsh. So maximum 250,000. Compared to England, that had over 2 million inhabitants, plus garrisons all around the British Isles. So in England alone, there's 2 million people. In Wales, there's 250,000. So that gives the scale. Glyndŵr is fighting a country with nearly up to 10 times. It depends on what estimates you go for, but nearly 10 times the people power. But that's just the people power. It's nothing to say the resources compared to Cymru were so much bigger again.
And like you said, that figure for Cymru is everybody, not just the Welsh. That's the Flemish and the immigrated
the
English as well. Yeah.
So Owain started being a little shit stirrer and kept reiterating that Percy was becoming poor. So Owain kept reinforcing to his nobles and to English nobles that you are losing out fighting for the English crown, because the English prince and king weren't paying him, even though they apparently the English crown they offered to pay 6 pence a piece, which was an amazing wage to every man at arms fighting for the Percys, but they were making the Percys pay that, so it was incredibly costly.
And he's just racking up debt every fucking skirmish or fight or whatever.
It's a bit like Trump with ICE, like in America, he pays them really well because he gets to do quite
like you get
job.
Like a $10,000 sign-up fee or something like that. Yeah.
But they're not paying from his own pocket. He's using states bills to pay for it. It's the exact same thing that Henry did. He was getting Percy to cover the bill. And also what's going on, the war was going on far longer than they'd ever thought. Like no rebellion in Britain had been going on for this long in years. No. Like it's just crazy.
As you mentioned in the last episode, I imagine they thought we'll quash this in like 6 months. Tops.
Max.
Done. Yeah.
And now it's well into its second year and they're making no progress. So Glyndŵr and Percy did try to negotiate because it was costing so much money, and Glyndŵr could only earn what he plundered. He just couldn't make any money, because they were always under attack. And it was nearly agreed that Glyndŵr would give up the rebellion, provided his wife and children would be completely spared, and he was allowed to live out a few more years as an old man with them, and there'd be no retribution to any Welsh who joined. And he even conceded all of his land, all that stuff. And it was pretty much agreed. Everyone had agreed on it. But then Lord Grey, the bastard from the start...
I was wondering when he'd turn his ugly head again,
he was furious that Glyndŵr was going to get a pardon. And because he'd helped Henry IV and to get there where he was as well. And in a privy council, he made this massive stink about genocide, about all the lands, all this stuff. And also that any land he was going to be given back to the English were completely worthless because they'd been burnt to the ground. And all the...
by the English.
And then he started saying it'd be a mockery to England if they pardoned such a man who'd caused such a thing.
The damage that... hurt egos have done over the years in history, isn't it? It's
egos of angry men, so he then started planning with Prince Hal, the young prince who would be Henry V. They started planning a third royal expedition into Wales. And then something is either that Lord Grey and some men try to get Hotspur or his dad, Lord Percy, and the Northumbrians to either negotiate with Glyndŵr and bring him somewhere under safe passage, and they'd come here, let's finally do this, but then betray him, or they'd tell Lord Grey, or Hotspur could tell that there was going to be a trick. Either way, Hotspur, the Northumbrians,
they sniffed out either it was a setup for them to do the dirty work, or that. There was something afoot.
Something afoot, and it's a record of Lord Percy, so Hotspur's dad. He was saying, "It is not in keeping with my rank to use my oath of fealty as a means of deception." And then he told Glyndŵr that deal was off and the English were coming once again, and the army hadn't been seen like this big in generations. It was a swelling, massive army, bigger than the first 2 expeditions. So now we go back to Wales.
What absolute top man as well, though.
I know.
Put the sort of the honour of the rank ahead of his allegiance to king and country, if you know what I mean. Mind you, like you said, the king had treated him.
But he was still English, and he was still he'd rather have not gone to war, but he was like, I'm not betrayed, I'm not doing it this way. Anyway, there's a guy called Hywel Selly, or Selif, who was a 7th Baron of Nanai and a supporter of Henry IV, but a Welshman. And there are a few accounts of the story I'm going to tell. Each differ in terms of how it properly unfolded, but the outcome is the same in all 3 stories. So I'm going to tell the one that I enjoyed the most, and has some cool things that you can still see to this day. But the outcome's the same in all 3. And the one I'm going to focus on has an abbot, the Abbot of Cymer. He tried to get a meeting between the two, as the abbot thought he could convince it, kind of stop the barbarism. And he got Glyndŵr and Hywel to kind of join together. He was a big fan of Glyndŵr, and he kind of got on with Hywel, and he was like, maybe I can say, I might even be able to see if Hywel will join Glyndŵr's cause, or at least stop what's going on here. So they went on a hunt together. So it's just the 2 of them. And whilst out on the hunt, Hywel drew his bow and attempted to shoot Glyndŵr from behind, but Glyndŵr twigged just in time, and he cut Hywel down and killed him. And like I mentioned, Glyndŵr was alone, but the abbot was waiting back at the entrance to the wood with lots of Hywel's men. And knowing the repercussions, he decided to hide the body in the hollow of an ancient oak tree. And the oak is subsequently said to have been haunted by the name of Dedwen Ciben yr Ellith, the hollow oak of the devil, or Cibren yr Ellith, the hollow oak of the ghost. And Glyndŵr then made his escape. He got away, but for centuries after this, that area of the woodland was pronounced to be haunted. In retaliation for this assassination attempt, Glyndŵr burnt down this guy's Hywel's manor. And Hywel's cousin, finding out about this, raised his army and headed to confront Glyndŵr, but was ambushed at Llanillid Bridge and was killed with 60 of his 200 men who came with him. And the rest either decided to surrender and join Glyndŵr, or they ran away. Then in 1402, a comet was seen across Wales, and the Welsh saw this as a huge fiery symbol of Owain's magical king authority and ability to free the Welsh from the shackles of the English. I'm just going to quickly read, because I didn't want to write this all down. So yeah, there's this poem, Iolo Goch, that poet who I mentioned at the start, who kind of helped him escape. He said, "See ye that blazing star, the heavens look down on freedom's war and light her torch on high, bright upon the dragon's crest. If it tells that glory wings will rest, when warriors meet to die, let earth's pale tyrants read despair and vengeance in its flame. Hail, hail, ye bards, the omen fair of conquest and of fame, and swell the rising, rushing mountain air with songs of Glyndŵr's name." And he wrote this thing, and people were like, love. It was like an absolute banger at the time.
I would say, it was playing in all the clubs at the time, all the taverns.
In contrast, so like I mentioned, he was this bad. He kind of set that round. People were loving it. In contrast, the English, especially the Franciscan monks, they saw it as a sign of genuine peril, and they saw it as due to have this comet coming across the sky as a symbol of the instability of the life under King Henry IV and the future Prince Henry. And they started like yearning back for King Richard, the old King Richard Lionheart. They were like, "Oh, remember King Richard Lionheart? Like,
how good was it? Oh, Sean Connery from Prince of Thieves, he was good, wasn't he?"
So they had been like the contrast between this comet for the Welsh, be like, "Yeah, he is a fucking dragon, son," but. Now we're going to talk about another little battle. So this is like Glyndŵr's kind of pomp as well. He's like really on the up. And this is the story of, so you know, Lord Grey, who's been an absolute bastard. They're like, fuck it, we're going for him now. After all this kind of like,
I'm so glad Lord Grey is. I'm glad someone's going to try and give Lord Grey his comeuppance.
Well, not someone, the one, Glyndŵr himself,
the boy, the OG.
So, after all this, you know, like I said, he kind of got like tricked. He was trying to like get this like bastard duplicitous like ploy to get Glyndŵr to like get ambushed. In mid-April 1402, Glyndŵr led his men to once more attack Rhuthlen Castle, which was strongly defended by Grey, his personal army, and his royal troops. The Welsh were repulsed, as in they were not like, oh, it's disgusting. They were pushed back and seemed in confusion. So they attacked there, didn't realise how many men Grey had, and they seemed in confusion, and the main body withdrew. Glyndŵr, with a small force, lingered out of bowshot range from the castle. Lord Grey, almost definitely urged on by the sympathisers of Glyndŵr, led a charge from the castle to finally vanquish his weakened enemy. Glyndŵr rode off quickly, and Grey led his force straight into an ambush by the rest of Glyndŵr's men.
I was going to say, he left the castle.
He literally ran out. Yeah.
Tactics 101, don't do that.
And with Grey's men in hot pursuit, when they spied a huge force on the side of them in the woods, however, these were captured cloaks. So they thought they saw a massive army, but it was just a bunch of cloaks and helmets on poles that Glyndŵr's men had put there to look like there was armies in the woods.
Smart move.
Grey's men then were like, fuck this. They wheeled round to escape, fleeing straight back into a Welsh ambush. So not only were the archers on one side, Grey's men were cut off. They didn't want to go into the forest. They thought there was men in there. So they were getting fucking sliced down. The English were sure that the main Welsh force would be coming at them from the false army in the woodland and desperately try to fight their way back to the safety of Rhuthlen Castle. Glyndŵr would focus on Grey and his bodyguards personally, possibly forcing them to Bryn Marchog, the Hill of the Seven Knights. It's supposed to be thus named as Grey and 6 others were cut off there. So at the end of the battle, it was 7 knights fighting on this hill. Glyndŵr was like,
so cinematic, fucking hell.
Yeah. However, Grey, so they killed all of his forces. Pretty much the entirety of Grey's army was killed. But Grey was too important to be killed, despite how much Glyndŵr hated him. So Glyndŵr captured him and took him away for a valuable ransom. He might have been held at Dolbaden Castle, but by tradition, his prison was at Llanfraid. Thomas Pennant left an 18th century description of a room. It's 13 feet square and 10 feet and 6 inches high. So it's like they built this like shitty prison for him.
Yeah.
And what's really important, we must remember that Owain Glyndŵr had no resources to pay, feed, or equip his followers in the War of Independence. So Grey was like inestimably valuable.
Yeah. Like you said, it's of course he would have wanted to fucking run him through there and then, but that would give him like so much resource for like a continued fight.
Yeah,
it wasn't worth killing him.
They put a deadline of 11,000 marks to Parliament. And I'll talk more in the next episode about how much that money that is. But they put fucking.
You definitely would want to do like the kid from our school, Evan Price, and give him a couple of jabs with a knife in the arm. Though, just give him a little fuck off.
And normally, you take someone in prison, you take him for a while. They gave him a month to pay this, or they'd kill him. So they ended up paying this massive
But he was like,
ransom.
please don't pay. Please don't pay for the Grey.
So Glyndŵr had just won Battle of Mynydd Hyddgen. He just beaten his massive enemy. And he's got 11,000 marks. He was like really, really fucking smashing it. This comet gone in the sky. His soldiers were doing really well. And then the last one I'm going to do for this episode is another great victory for Glyndŵr, which is the Battle of Bryn Glas, or Pilleth, which we've discussed before. So the Battle of Bryn Glas, we've done a full episode on it, but it's a little bit of background before I talk about like the logistics of it. It's towards Mid Wales. You can go visit there. It's one of the few places in like Welsh history that they've actually got good signs, and it's like you feel quite present there, don't you?
We went up there, didn't we? It's
really cool.
It is a hell of a fucking hill. When Frank talks about the hill now, we can vouch it's steep as fucking anything.
So I'll talk briefly about this battle. So, like I mentioned, we've had a string of victories for Glyndŵr Sylfa. Owain's second in command, Rhys Gethin of Cwm Llanerch, which is near Conwy, he could see the English approaching. And when you're there, it's a real wide valley, and you can see the River Lug, and you can like instantly see when armies come from England up to this part of Wales. So he took his army as a defensive position on the hill with half of his force hidden. Glyndŵr's sons were also kept in the army: Griffith, Meredith, and Madog, Thomas and John. So he had 5 of his sons at this battle.
It's hell of commitment, isn't it? That's hedging your bets a little bit.
Glyndŵr and Rhys Gethin placed around 800 archers at the foot of Bryn Glas, and as the English approached, they retreated to a position about 2/3 up the slope. And then about 800 men at arms and infantry were hidden in the thick woodland. So they had like half the army as archers halfway up the hill, and the rest hidden in the side of the mountain. They were hidden there by a thick woodland cover and a gully behind a blazing church, which is still there to this day. Mortimer's army, so Edward Mortimer, who's like a really, really, really well-respected English family, had led the assault personally. His army formed up and began loosing volleys of arrows into the Welsh, but they fell short owing to the steep gradient. But the Welsh were further up the hill, so their fires were fucking deadly, were piercing, destroying the fuck out of all the English. So then the English said, right, fuck, they've only got archers, we're going to send our men at arms, and they waited for the order to attack. They led them up there. Mortimer led them personally, but then they were completely wiped out. The archers got to them. The order to charge was accompanied by the Welsh longbowmen of his own army defecting. And as we mentioned on our episode, either the Welsh archers on Mortimer's army decided they realised the battle wasn't going their way and decided to join their Welsh counterparts, or it was pre-planned that Glyndŵr was like, right, go with Mortimer, and as soon as the battle commences, shoot the bastards in the back. So, yes, as I was saying, to order the charge was accompanied by the Welsh longbowmen defecting, firing direct volleys into the English army. Glyndŵr's own archers now took up spears and put down their bows and charged down the hill into the advancing English, who had been significantly reduced in numbers. Simultaneously, Glyndŵr's banner appeared and his men charged from cover to attack. The English ordered a cavalry charge of the horsemen in the valley, but the steepness of the hill meant that the horses were exhausted well before they could reach the fighting. The remaining English foot soldiers were forced backwards, and the battle broke into 2 parts. The English at the foot of the hill were now charged by the Welsh cavalry, and the English were battling on the hill were decimated by the Welsh spearmen and archers. Mortimer's exhausted troops collapsed and broke. The Welsh had won their first major open warfare battle against English forces. It is said that immediately after the battle, many English corpses were mutilated by Welsh women camp followers in revenge for Henry IV's expedition in 1401, which accompanied rape and capture of children. The English Parliament was desperate to portray the Welsh as savages, so they end up saying that the Welsh chopped off the English penises and put them in their mouths. But how true is that?
Well, we went to see that site of that battle, didn't we? And there's supposedly the mass grave they made for the English soldiers there. It's called something like the I can't think of the Welsh name now. But basically, it's 3 massive trees there, 3 poplar trees, if I remember right. Yeah. And that's actually there. We went to go see it, and it's actually sort of cordoned off. Whether there's actually the mass grave there or not, but it's quite a cool little visual.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a point of significant cultural importance. You're not allowed to do any metal detecting or anything like that there. And they have the person who owned the land found so many bones there that he thought it would be a honourable thing to like build a forest above it. So he planted loads of trees to like kind of bury this dead because there was a mass grave, like you mentioned there.
It's weird though. It's literally fenced off, isn't it? With these 3 massive poplar trees. Yeah. But no, yeah, that is literally, if you're just starting to dabble in sort of Welsh history, that's one of the first battles you'll probably come across because it's like one of the huge wins.
It's a really massive win, yeah. Well, that takes us to the end of episode 2. 3 more to go, and like I mentioned, I think this one's quite a battle-heavy episode because he's won. He's really on the up here. But yeah, join for next week for part 3.
Part 3, Fran Tree. See you later.
Welsh legend holds that should Wales ever need someone bold, I'll rise up to help them. Mind you, I'm 600 years old, and Fick will